So the topic is regional electricity market regulation. The government regulation dominates the utility sector, as you all know. Regulators are obligated to create a level playing field for all the stakeholders of electricity generation, transmission, distribution, as well as trade. They also need to make sure that the consumers get a fair deal. Their ever-increasing role in the energy sector development is gaining a lot of attention. Regulators are also facing emerging challenges driven by technological change, evolving social priorities, and global events. Now, this session is the first of its kind in the region, which brings the energy sector regulators of Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Bhutan together to discuss their country's perspective on regulation and working together towards harmonizing the regulatory framework in the region. In this matter, I would like to invite on stage our keynote speaker, Mr. Tor Langset, Head of Economic Regulation Section, Norwegian Water Resources and Energy Directorate. Our moderator is Mr. Rob Taylor, Chief of Party, USAID's Nepal Hydropower Development Project. On our panel are Mr. Dilip Bahadur Singh, Chairman, Electricity Regulatory Commission, Government of Nepal. We also have with us one more time Pankaj Batra. He's the former Chairman of Central Electricity Authority, Government of India, as well as Mr. Monowar Islam, Chairman, Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission, Government of People's Republic of Bangladesh, and Mr. Samdrup K. Thinle, Chief Executive Officer, Bhutan Electricity Authority, Royal Government of Bhutan. And now to move forward with this session, I would like to invite and request Mr. Rob.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes? Yes? No? Yes. Okay, good. It's been a long day. You all are to be congratulated for holding on as long as you have. We won't keep you much longer. Well, what we have to tell you today is, as we say in America, completely different. And now for something completely different. What's completely different? Wow. Even I can hear that. What's completely different? What's completely different is that you have regulators from all of the South Asia countries who will be involved in regional trade on the same dais together. Never happened before. Now, life is about baby steps. We measure everything on the big events, but really, it's all about taking the baby steps, and this is one of those steps. But it's really important. It's really important because it is the beginning of a new chapter in South Asian relations, both commercial and political, and it is going to be a driving force. I want to say the driving force, but I won't. I'll say a driving force in what is going to happen over the next several years. Now, as most of you know, I've been in Nepal for 5 years, and I have seen everything that people are celebrating today, all of the wonderful things that have led up to today. I feel like I've been in the middle of almost all of them. And regional trade and regulation is one of the most important things in my working life, let's say. We're going to have an opportunity to hear a few words from each of these gentlemen who are coming from different regulators in South Asia about their experience with India, their experience with regional trade, their experience with regulation. Now, when I think about electricity sector reforms and evolution, it's a line. It's one line. And everybody is somewhere along that evolutionary path. But there's only one direction. The only beginning is birth and the only end is death. And we're going that way. But we're not dying, we're growing. Nepal has a brand new regulator. It seems like a huge thing, but it's a culmination of 20 years of baby steps trying to get a regulator in this country. We got it. We've got commissioners, and we're starting to work. But these guys are well advanced on that line of evolution. They're somewhere else. We'll talk about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for Nepal, but we're not going to talk about that yet. With each one of these, we're going to learn their experiences and where they feel that they are in that continuum and what their challenges are. And what you're going to find is the challenges are the same. Whether you're a regulator that's been around for 30 years, you're still going to have tension with the ministry. That's just the way life is. There's no such thing as an independent regulator. There are different gradations of independence. But what we want to celebrate today is regulation of the power sector, and particularly regulation of regional trade. So that's what we're going to talk about, and you haven't heard that. You've heard a lot of things today, but you haven't heard that yet. And so we're going to end on a slightly new subject with new perspectives, but first, Tor is going to take us back to where we're supposed to be focusing our attention, on the mechanisms of regional trade. Now, Tor Linseth is from Norway. He's coming from an entity that's very much like, I guess, like the Ministry of Water Resources and Energy and Irrigation in Nepal. You do most of those things, don't you? Yes, you do. So it's interesting to think that he's bringing Dinesh Gamiri's perspective only from Norway. Interesting analogy. So we're going to let you start, and you're welcome to get going. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Distinguished guests, dear friends from the regulators from the regions, from Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and India. Thank you, IPAN, for letting me have this opportunity to share some of my experience. My experience is, I have experience from the energy regulator in Norway since the early 1990s. That's been quite a long way. And I will try to share some of the experience that I have had and we have had within the next approximately 13 minutes. I'm going to talk about Norway, a country that is quite different from the countries around here in most areas. But when it comes to the power sector, we have some similarities. First, some facts about Norway so you can see some of the similarities. We have 1,750 power plants in Norway, scattered around in the country, some very small, some quite big. They are owned by the government, by the counties, by the municipalities, by private investors. They are selling their power in a regional wholesale electricity market, like Nord Pool, as you have heard about earlier today. We have 33,000 megawatts installed capacity. The peak load is 25,000 megawatts. Average annual generation is approximately 139 terawatt hours a year. Consumption is approximately 133 terawatt hours a year. We have 95% hydropower. The rest is mostly wind and some solar and some other minor stuff. We have something you don't have around here, and that is 173 retailers, mainly owned by private investors and municipalities. They are buying their energy in the regional electricity wholesale market and selling it in the domestic market. They are selling it to me in a market. The electricity prices, the power purchase price for me is not regulated. I can choose my retailer and pick his price. It's competitive business. But that is only 1/3 of my electricity bill. I will come back to the rest later. We have 123 distribution system operators, mainly owned by the municipalities and the counties, responsible for building and maintaining distribution grid, to transport electricity from the transmission grid till the end consumers. We have one transmission system operator. It is owned by the government. It's unbundled from any competitive businesses, but it's one of the owners of Nord Pool. The transmission system operators owns interconnector capacity of 6,000 megawatts. Some overhead lines, several subsea cables to Denmark and the Netherlands. 2 more subsea cables are under construction, one to Germany and one to UK. And by 2021, we will have interconnection capacity on approximately 8,800 megawatts. All interconnected capacities is given to the market. Generators are not allowed to have any interconnected capacity. The electricity bill for consumers consists of 3 parts. I've mentioned one of them, the retail price, the price I pay for the power. The second third is the distribution tariff, which is the price for transporting the electricity to my house. That is a regulated tariff, and we are regulating the tariff. And the second third is taxes from the government. Why do we trade power across borders? Sorry. The main reason is that this is the most cost-efficient way of dealing with energy security, the most cost-efficient way. Otherwise, we had to build up a huge overcapacity on generation, and that is quite expensive. And it's the best way of ensuring equal access to cheapest power for the consumers. What today was developed to the Nordic Power Exchange, Nord Pool, was started in the early 1980s by the generators themselves as a national market to exchange power between regions within Norway for security purposes, because they were mandated to supply energy in certain regions, and they didn't have enough water at any time. So they have to exchange energy during the year, and then they use this pool to exchange that water or the energy. In the mid-1990s, the market was open for cross-border trade with Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, and they also got ownership to the Nord Pool on equal terms. Later, the Nord Pool area has been extended to 3 Baltic countries. Today, the Nordic market is coupled to several other European regional markets. And all in all, there are 37 countries involved in that market. But there is a single way of determining the price for in every region. A cost-efficient way of securing the power supply is still an important reason for this trade from a national perspective. That is also equal access to the cheapest power for all consumers. So that's where we are today, but Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is a well-functioning regional market. It will take time, but it is important to decide where you want to go and plan for the future. Ensure that any step you take is a step in the right direction, otherwise the way will be very long. When regulating the utilities in the power sector, it is very important for us to have in mind that we are dealing with very long-term, irreversible investments. And in many cases also have a huge impact on the environment. We use land, valuable land, and valuable nature. To ensure sufficient investments, one need a proper environment for investors. There must be prospect for an adequate return on their investments, and the regulatory risk should be as low as possible. Both issues must be addressed when the regulatory framework is set up, and we bear that in mind in whatever we do. There are many issues that must be addressed when dealing with multinational power trade. Unfortunately, I do not have time to get into all of them. I would have spent several days, I guess, but can mention only a few. Even though the market is regional, the legislation will most likely still be national. One has to ensure that the national legislations are not an obstacle for regional trade and that the different national legislations is aligned. As long as a few number of nations are involved, bilateral or trilateral or multilateral agreements between transmission system operators on codes and standards to be followed, and so on, may be sufficient. That has been the case in the Nordic area until recently, but now when there are 37 countries involved, you cannot agree on each and everything. And then the amount of legislations and the overnational regulations are increasing rapidly. It's easier to develop things when they are quite small than when they are quite big. So small steps is a good thing to do in the beginning. European countries are involved in the same market. Many and very detailed codes and standards have been developed and implemented. There is also a European body that is supposed to handle disputes between two or more countries. The body is called ACER. On national level, it is important that the legislation is creating a level playing field for all the market players. Generators' access to the grid on equal terms and conditions is very important. So is also the access to the transmission capacity. To ensure this, it is recommended that the transmission system operator is unbundled from the generation when opening it up for competition in either national or international markets. In a regional power market, one of the main tasks of the national regulator is to monitor utilities' activities to avoid any anti-competitive behavior. This may take many forms: misuse of insider information when bidding into the market, strategic improper bidding is another topic, blocking of transmission capacity are examples of such behavior. This is very, very difficult to monitor and requires a lot of information and regulatory capacity. It is therefore important that the regulators are sufficiently empowered so they can force the utilities to hand over any information they need to have sufficient resources to do their surveys. They should also have the power to fine the utilities if they don't hand over the information in due time, or if they are caught in doing anything wrong. One of the most important prerequisites for the sustainable regional market is trust. Trust. You have to believe that those you are going to interact with will you well. Otherwise, it will not work. You need trust between governments, between regulators, and between the system operators. And the regulator also needs to be trusted by the policymakers, the consumers, and also the utilities. The utilities will not agree with the regulator, but they have to trust that he's doing his best and in goodwill. In the Nordic area, high-level civil servants from the Ministry of Energy cooperates in power market expert groups that meets regularly to discuss various topics for the Nordic cooperation in the power market. They discuss various common issues, the way forward, any conflicts of interest, and so on, to bring things on, to avoid conflicts. Nordreg is an organization of the Nordic energy regulators. The mission is to actively promote legal and institutional framework and conditions necessary for developing the Nordic and the European electricity markets. There are several working groups within this organization and task forces that deal with many practical issues to avoid or solve conflicts between countries. They meet very frequently. We use this cooperation also for capacity building of our staff. The European organization ACER and CER are similar organizations on European level that we are even more involved in. We have at least 1 or 2 people in any European city working in a task force or a working group every week. Every week. And the issues are the same. Can we agree upon a common framework for the markets? And so on. How can we avoid conflicts? Because there will be a lot of conflicts during time. You will not always agree, but it has to be solved. Otherwise, you will lose a lot of money, all of you. And so, what should the regulators do? You should not take this as advice for these regulators that they have to follow. This is the advice that we give to ourselves in our daily work. And it's by no means a complete list. It's just some general things that we have to think about when we are regulating. We do monitor compliance with terms and conditions for cross-border trade, and we have anti-competitive behavior in focus. Because if somebody is operating in a way that hinders the competition, the market will not work, and trust is broken, and we have no market anymore. We do approve agreements between transmission system operators rather than making them. We give them a framework to work under, and then they have to agree between themselves what is the best arrangement to make things work, and then they have to go back to the regulators for approval. And then, if there are any disagreements between the system operators, we will discuss that in the regulatory forums and find a solution to it. We do approve or fix domestic tariffs in a sense. We are not fixing them, the tariffs itself, but more the total revenues that they can collect from through the tariffs. And we do that to avoid unreasonable prices. But we don't regulate prices that is supposed to be fixed in the market, for example, the retail price or the wholesale regional market price. We don't make decisions without exploring if it may be a conflict of interest with anyone, especially with our neighboring countries. An example, if somebody wants to reduce the interconnected capacity for the market to secure for security of supply reasons, we have to bear in mind that we then increase the problems for our neighboring countries, because they get less access to power. And we also may cause an increase in prices. We try not to be tempted to perform any form of micromanagement. We do focus on telling, we do not focus on telling the utilities how they should run the businesses. they are much better to run their businesses than we will be. We focus on telling them what they not can do, because the rules and regulations say they cannot do. Regulators will only succeed if they are trusted by the policymakers, the utilities, and the stakeholders. And trust is built up through wise decisions and good interactions with utilities and other stakeholders. Bear that in mind, because that is, I think, one of the things that I want to underpin is cooperation is a prerequisite for trust, and trust is necessary if anything is going to happen. And my last word is, it may take years to build up trust, but it takes only a second to break it. Thank you very much.
Hello. There we go. What did you just hear? What you just heard was a vision. Shakespeare said, "A consummation devoutly to be wished." An ideal, a goal, something that you're probably never going to quite get to, but you strive for it every day. That's sort of a regulatory creed as per Norway and the European Union. Why is that here? It's here because regulation is new to this country. And there are a lot of people who know an awful lot of things about the electricity sector, but don't know about monopoly regulation. And this is a monopoly regulator. It's an economic regulator who is intended to keep the market level and to protect the right of access for everybody who wants to play in the market and who has the capability to do so. I've been working on regulation for 20 years. It's always the most challenging at the very beginning when the regulator's created. It's a little late in my career to be having another baby, but it looks like I've got a baby, at least for a while. And the baby is the regulator in Nepal. We were asked by the ministry 5 years ago to drive the process of sector regulation, and after a year and a half, we had a law, and after another year and a half, we had a regulator, and then after 6 months, we had some commissioners. And now we've got the commissioners, and as our commissioner said, we hit the ground running. That's the first thing he said to me. We're not stopping, we're not slowing down. We're going to hit the ground running and do our best to catch up with the other folks who are here. Every one of these places has a different legal and regulatory framework. And you heard Tor mention that we're driven by our laws and we're driven by the regulatory framework that we create, which is a product of the law. And if the law's not great, then it adds uncertainty and vagueness to the regulatory process. But each one of the people here represents an institution that has some vagueness, that has some uncertainty, that is not quite sure what it can and can't do. And it's got utilities that are pushing back against them. So they will have to find a place where they can live together. And in some places the regulator is very strong, other places the ministry may be strong, other places the regulator may be strong. They will all have to find their place where they can live and work and progress the regulatory process. So now I'm going to start with my friend and my colleague, Dilip Bahadur Singh, who is the chairman of ERC Nepal, the latest regulator in South Asia. I'm going to ask each one of us to speak for 4 minutes. By the way, you did 16, not 13. I'm going to ask everyone to speak for 4 minutes about where they are and where they think they're going in the South Asia regional regulatory space. So,
Thank you, Rob. As you told that we are very new, and our CRC friend from India, they are 20 plus years, and we are 20 plus weeks. So you can imagine catching up them, how difficult it would be. Nonetheless, we are trying for that, and we have started doing quite a lot of things. And we are mandated to do some functional things by our act, Electricity Regulation Act 2017, and Electricity Regulation Regulatory Commission Regulatory Commission of Electricity 2018. So we are mandated to have competition and consumers' interest, tariff and regulation of power purchase, technical management, and compliance examinations of licenses, and enhancement of organizational capacity of licenses, and of course, dispute resolution. So within this 6 months of time, we have achieved few things. We have produced 3-4 directives. Of them, the important are directives on approval of share issues. It was done in July. We came in on 9th of April, so 9th of May, okay? And bylaws on purchase and sale of electricity and conditions to be fulfilled by the licensees. It was done in October. Consumer tariff directives released on November, which allows tariff revision. And we have done our organization and management survey. And till now, we have got only 10 staff provided by the government of Nepal, seconded from the government of Nepal. So we are very much short of human resources. Nonetheless, we have been doing all these things, and we have completed our O&M survey and given it to the government of Nepal. And once it is approved by the cabinet, we'll be having a few more staff. Few more means maybe 80, okay? And we have done few more other things. If you allow me to tell something about that. Just now, I talked to some of the developers about what are the things we have done with regards to PPA regulation. So there was PPA clauses that hydrological risk should be taken by the IPPs only, which has been removed from them. So which gave lots of benefit to them. Then apart from that, they have to put 10% of spinning reserve, and they are not getting money for that. So when I talked to the MD of BNEA, he said that, okay, it's okay, now we'll pay them all. Then after that, if due to the hydrological region, if they can produce more than that, and they were not paid previously, now they are getting money out of that. That's one thing. Second thing, there were 25 very sick projects, hydropower projects, and they were at the verge of collapsing. So they came to everywhere. They came to us, they went to NEA, they went to the ministry, they went to the Prime Minister, everywhere, and they were asking for the help. We are there to regulate, but what I think, unless we are not self-sufficient in the power, we have to facilitate them. Act like a scout, not acting only like a police. We'll do a policing thing afterwards, but now we will be acting like a scout, helping all these developers, consumers, and all of the stakeholders. So we did that in proactive basis. So I talked to the governor of the Rashtra Bank of Nepal and requested him to provide them on 3% refinancing loan, because they are getting 12% interest rate. For any car, if you go to buy any car, you get loan for 6 and 7%. But Hyderabad develops, they're paying 10, 11, 12, 13%. So there's no rationale on that. So I requested him, and he said us that, okay, why don't you send a letter to us? We sent a letter to them, they have decided, and they said that if you can put them into the SIC project category, then we can refinancing and 1% for 2 years. So that's what done. So we got a letter from the Rashtra Bank of Nepal, and we sent the same thing to the ministry. Now it's on the line. Let me tell you one thing. Our power market is of $7 billion. If 25 number of projects will sink, what will happen to the market? What will happen to our system? What will happen to all the shareholders and everything? Who will come there to invest? Neither any Nepali investor nor any foreign investors. So we have to rescue them. So rescuing few projects would enhance the probability of getting investment in Nepal. Let me tell you one more thing, that the government in Nepal has decided to build 15,000 megawatt in 10 years, which means we require 30 billion US dollars for generation, 15 for transmission, and 5 for distribution. Altogether, it's 50 billion US dollar, and every year we have to invest 5 billion US dollar. And of that, Nepal would be spending only 20 to 25% only. So the remaining should come from other sources, FDI or whatsoever, on solely private sector basis, solely foreign project, or on PPP basis. If there is no confidence on Nepalese market, how can they come? Why should they come? So that's why, to build that confidence, we have worked quite a lot, which is proactive. As I tell you already, it's not a cup of regulators, but as I told you already, we will be working as a facilitator at the first instant. Whenever the market goes, they get strength on that, then we will start really hardcore regulation. Thank you very much.
8 minutes. Okay, we're going to move on to Sandrup Thinlay, my new friend from Bhutan. Haven't been there yet, so I look forward to that invitation.
You're welcome.
I'll come over and give you some lectures.
Thank you.
So, if you would, give us a few words about 4 minutes. 4 minutes about your experience with trading with India and the evolution of your regulator.
Thank you very much. I think I'll start, because the time is short, I'll start with the enactment of the Electricity Act that was enacted in 2001 by the Parliament of Bhutan. But it says that the act will come into effect by the executive order of the minister. So it took 5 years for the executive order to be issued. So the executive order was issued only in 2005. And after the issuance, then again, it took another 1 year for the formation of the Bhutan Electricity Authority. But then that was just a cell in one of the department under the ministry. So it took another 5 years to give us a full autonomy. So that was in 2010, on 1st January. So when we gained the full autonomy, that means financial as well as the administrative powers, we were only 8 people, sir. So we also started with only 8 people back in 2010. Now we have the 37 people. And from there on, we started building our capacity. But then, as you know, that the regulation, the act, enacting of the act at the time we gained the full autonomy took 10 years. So then they expect a lot of things, but then we have to leapfrog by seeking assistance. And by the way, Mr. Torre here, he has been instrumental in developing our economic regulations. And the Norwegian government, they were kind enough to assist us, so that's why we could leapfrog and learn fast in the regulation, technical regulation, as well as the economic regulation. Now, with regard to the relationship with our India, I think everybody knows that our first power project is the Chukha power project, 336 megawatt. But we should not forget that the government of India helped us in developing our small and micro power idols back in late 90s, late 60s. So, but at that time it was all isolated. They were, islanded. So, the microgrids were not interconnected to each other. However, when we embarked on our Wise King, when he embarked on the Chukha power plant project, the whole focus was to export. Therefore, because we could not consume it and we wanted to earn revenue from that, so we had to meet the technical requirements because India was the market, so we had to meet the technical requirements, just not our technical requirements, but there, because we have to sell it to them. Now, fast forward to 2010, and by 2010, when we became a fully independent, we already have so much, 1,000 megawatt, 500 megawatt power. But now you know that Bangladesh hydropower 720 megawatt. What gave us the experience is that ours was export driven, so therefore we, all the technical requirements were seen based on the market. We looked at the market and what was the requirement, because you just could not dictate on your terms, because you have to look at the market, and if their technical parameters, you are not meeting their technical parameters, and how are you going to sell it to them? And also the one was the financing back in, because when you started the Chukha hydropower project, because as you know, a small country, we could not finance this project. So what we did was that we make an arrangement with government of India that, okay, you please develop this project, but also if there is a risk, because our young Himalayan mountain range, we are in that range, and we do not know what geological surprises we will face. So we shifted the whole risk to them, but for the government of India, such a big country, they could take those risks. And with the success of Chukha, then we embarked onto the series of projects. And that's how we are today here.
Six minutes. I think I'm learning something here, and it is that no one can make it. So I'm going regulators often have to negotiate with their regulated entities. So I'm going to have a little negotiation with you. 5 minutes. I'll give you one, and you take one, and let's see how well we get on with that. Now, from this point, I would like to turn it over to Monowar Islam. I must say I have had an experience with the regulator in Bangladesh. It was probably 10 years ago, 2 weeks of training. It was right about the time you were adding natural gas to your regulated activities. And it was a great experience. And so I was very happy to meet you when you came last night, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the evolution of your regulator.
Thank you, Bob. Moderator, Mr. Moderator. I can maintain your time if I do not speak, so it's better. However, at the outset, I'd like to thank our keynote speaker. It's very rich, we learned a lot. And I also congratulate Mr. Dilli Bahadur Singh, Chairman of ERC, Nepal, as a new family member of SAFIR, because we have a South Asia organizations, and incidentally, I am chairperson of that poor organization, actually, SAFIR. So I welcome him in our family. Let us talk about the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission. Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission started its journey in 2003 with the enactment of Parliament Act in 2003, and actually it started its journey in 2004 What do we regulate? Actually, the task of regulator is different from country to country, but Bangladesh, we regulate natural gas, electricity, and petroleum products. The task of regulator actually is very challenging, difficult. Its basic task is to protect the interest of the investors as well as to protect the interest of the consumer, which is really a difficult subject. The success of Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission is that we have adjusted tariff for gas and electricity more than 8 to 9 times. So at this moment, there is another hearing is going on for electricity. So the price distortion or government subsidy is minimum as possible for electricity. But gas sector is still there is a gap because recently we imported LNG, which is very expensive. So we had to recently adjust it for 35% price of gas. And we have another success story is that Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission created 3 distinct funds to ensure the energy security in Bangladesh. Number 1 is Gas Development Fund. Number 2 is Energy Security Fund. Another is Power Sector Development Fund, which contributes to manage funds from our own source without depending with our development partners. I should say something about cross-border trade. The moment we started importing power from India, at that time there was no regulation. The Indian cross-border electricity trade regulation came into force in 2019. I must say it's a very positive, very dynamic, very generous regulation which helps a lot to facilitate the cross-border electricity trade in the South Asia. Because if we'd like to import power from Nepal, we have to depend on India because we have to transmit this through India. Again, if we would like to import power from Bhutan, we have to, of course, need support from India. That's why Indian regulation is very supportive. In Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission Act, there is nothing mentioned about the cross-border trade. So we don't face any problem for that. But I believe that Energy Regulatory Commission task is not to regulate, but to facilitate the cross-border electricity trade, which is very good for the country. Again, I must mention that our main intention to provide electricity to our people at an affordable price. So cross-border electricity trade, I firmly believe that it will help to reduce the price of electricity, which ultimately will benefit our consumers. Our vision is that to ensure good governance and justice in the energy sector of Bangladesh. Thank you.
"5 minutes, it worked." You're the first guy all day. You may notice that the man on the end looks slightly familiar. When they offered us a drink of you, I said, "Make it a double." And Pankaj is here with us, not from the regulator in India, full disclosure. So maybe not quite all the regulators from the region are here, but I think you maybe are as close to a regulator in India as anybody will ever find, except maybe a regulator in India. So it occurred to me not very long ago that this whole regional trade thing, if you didn't have to do it, would you do it? It's an awful lot of hard work. We have glossed over the legal and regulatory framework for regional trade because it's really complicated. It's really detailed, and you really have to work on it to get it right. If we talk about the regulator in Nepal, that's regulation 1.0. That's figuring out where your feet are and what you can do given the political realities of the place where you are. And that's a doctoral dissertation in itself. But then there are other levels of regulation. And I would say that regional trade, cross-border trade, is maybe 5.0. It's a lot of work, and Rome wasn't built in a day. I love that slide. But what drives, my first question, what drives the regional trade? Is it desperation? There's this old joke about an economist and two scientists who are found on a desert island, and they have a can of tomatoes, and they're trying to figure out how to get into the can of tomatoes so that they can eat. And the scientists and the physicists, they come up with all these great ideas about how we can open the can. And the economist says, imagine a can opener. That's his answer. Imagine a can opener. It's kind of like that with regional markets. Imagine a market. Well, you're not going to imagine a regional one first. You're going to imagine the market in Nepal, the market in India, the market in wherever. You only start imagining regional trade for, I thought of two reasons. Maybe there's some more. One is you have investor animus. You have the animal spirits are driving you to find new markets, as Alan Greenspan would say. The other one is desperation. I got to find a market. I've got to make a sale. Electricity is weird, but it's still buying and selling of a commodity. And people do that all the time. And if you can't find a buyer, you haven't got anything. So maybe it's driven, and I want to ask Pankaj, in India, was it driven by investor animus and the animal spirits? Or was it driven by desperation? Or was it driven by a government vision? Maybe that's a third one. A government vision of how we can be more efficient in our activities. So if you'll talk about that for a minute, that would be great.
Rob, you had your child late, but we'll bring them up in double quick time. We'll bring them from a baby to an adult in 9 years. Okay, that's in a lighter vein. But it was driven in India by government policy, basically, because we had a lot of surplus power, and we were looking for markets, or we were looking for demand creation. We have we had some avenues of demand creation in India about electrifying railways and about a number of other things, giving power. There's a power for all program in India. That is I think 24/7 supply to all through their scheme, which is there. So we were looking at other demand creation of demand in other areas also, and one of the avenues we found when we studied neighboring countries was the shortage of power that they had in Bangladesh as well as Nepal. And so it was driven by government policy. It took a little time to implement, but it happened. So that's it was a win-win situation for both sides, because we had some of our generation surplus capacity being used, and also helped Bangladesh and Nepal with power, to reduce their deficits. Bhutan, of course, was always connected to us since a long time, since the 80s, and we were getting power from them through projects which were aided by India, and in return for power, all surplus power to be sold to India. So that's how it really started. Do you want me to stop at that? Okay. So there's little difference between the regulator in India and in Bangladesh. In the CRC regulates only electricity, whereas Bangladesh regulates gas and oil also, is it? Okay, gas and electricity. There are many markets around the world which regulate energy, which I think is a better thing, and there's thinking in the Indian government also of doing that. So let's see whether it happens. As far as we've had a learning experience like Nepal would have, and like Bhutan and Bangladesh have had, but we've had a learning experience. We had where we had a very unreliable grid when the regulator was formed, with a lot of trippings and then analysis of trippings going on, investigations of how to set that right. But the regulator actually made some reliability standards on frequency control and voltage control and open access regulations, which made sure that the capacity of transmission was not exceeded. And because of that, it started getting better and better. And now from times when we used to have a number of grid incidents or grid trippings, number of trippings in a year, or even maybe every month in some cases, and in case of southern region every day. But now we don't have major grid trippings we've not had it for 10 years. I mean, we had from 2000 or 2001, we had the next one we had was 2012, and from that time now also we've not had a big disturbance. So I think there is a lot of value in regulators for seeing reliability of the grid, and the policy is more of overall, whereas the regulatory is more of going down to ground level to ensure that they make rules and regulations to see that also that's from the technical point of view, but also the tariffs to see that they're regulated, are reasonable, to see that efficiency comes into the sector, competition comes into the sector, and make regulations for competition. So that's what I'd like to say.
Hello? There we go. So now the microphone's coming back to me. Everybody gets one last bite at the apple. And this may be an impossible bite for you. We've been talking a lot today about hydropower, other kinds of power, renewable energy, energy efficiency, lots of things, lots of tools that a government can use. And as I said at some point today, a lot of electricity markets are in chaos because technology is changing the way things have been done for 100 years. And nobody's quite sure where it's going or how fast it's going to get there. And there are so many new kinds of energy. So the question is, what can a regulator do who's already been around for a while, faced with this chaos, faced with wet season, dry season, night, day, wind, still, all of the things that we have to deal with? What tools can you use to help rationally integrate some of those renewable kinds of energy into a market?
So, things would have continued to be the same, but they changed. There were disruptions because of environmental reasons, and therefore you had more of renewables, and the major renewables were intermittent in nature, solar and wind. So you got to deal with it. Now, if that's a policy that's been formed, you got to deal with it. So there are, like in India, we made regulations to deal with these disruptions. We took out regulations on connectivity standards, which dealt with connectivity of these intermittent sources to the grid. The technical, there are some technical points over there where we say how it's to be connected. As far as also power quality, because of this, a lot of solid state electronics coming into the grid because of these reasons. And also distributed generation, connectivity of distributed generation, generating resources to the grid, which means rooftop solar, PV, and things like that. And recently, we've taken out amendments this year or last year on connectivity of electric vehicles to the grid and storage. So you have to deal with these things because they are going to become a reality, and it's always better to have the policy and regulation in place before these disruptions actually cause a disruption. So it is the duty of the policymakers to think in advance and the regulators to make regulations in advance to facilitate these things.
Thank you. Now, the regulator of the regulators has just given me a signal. And it was a price signal and it was a food signal. And I think that we need to pay attention. We used to say that when the regulator calls you up and you're the utility and the regulator says, jump, you say, I'm already jumping. I'm jumping right now. What do you want me to do now? Because they control everything about the effectiveness of your business. So when our regulator tells us that we better zip it, as we say, I think that's a good idea. You all have been amazing. I know you're tired. We're all a little tired. But let's go to dinner. Let's go to our reception. And thank you so much. And thank you to our panel. You were fantastic.
Thank you very much, moderator Mr. Rob Taylor, for doing a wonderful job. Don't go right away. We have one last question for the day that you need to vote on the app. Just give us 5 minutes, and after that, we'll finish quickly, I promise. Can we have the question on the screen? There you go. What is the key change required in present cross-border electricity trade regulations in India is the question. You have the 4 options. I would also like to invite on stage Anand Chaudhary, Treasurer, EPAN, to present the mementos to our keynote speaker, the moderator, as well as the panel. Now, first of all, thank you to our keynote speaker, Mr. Tor Langsed, Head of Economic Regulation Section, Norwegian Water Resources and Energy Directorate. Can I have the team please come up on the stage very quickly with the memento? That would be great. Thank you. Next to our moderator, Mr. Rob Taylor. To our panel, Mr. Dilip Bahadur Singh. Pankaj Batra. That means he's already received his memento on one of the first sessions beforehand. Mr. Monowar Islam. Mr. Samdrup K. Thinle. And of course, right after this, I'd like to request the gentleman for a quick photo op. In the meantime, we will see you for dinner. Remember, tomorrow we start at 9 a.m. with our remaining 4 sessions. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and have a great night at the same time. So the Power Summit 2019, organized by EPAN, Ministry of Energy, Water Resources and Irrigation, Embassy of India, Embassy of Republic of Bangladesh, supported by Nepal Electricity Authority, Knowledge Partner Deloitte, Associates CNI, FNCCI, Nepal Engineers Association, as well as YCNC, Nepal Tunneling Association, Nepal Hydropower Association. We have a sponsor, IFC, USAID, FMO, ADB, NEPEX, the World Bank, NMB Bank, NHPC, Chongqing Wangbian Electric Group, HPL, Voith, HIDCL, UK8, NWEDC, PTC India, Ekikrit Byapar Company Private Limited, Jade Consult, Nubble Bank, Sunrise Bank, ICTC, Global IME, Cosmic, BPC, Tractable, CCK, BKPC, SJVN, BFL, and Sanima Hydro. Thank you to all the team, to all the members of EPAN, as well as to all the translators for today. Thank you so much for the work that you have done. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.